have one of these two pens?
Yes.
Yeah, clap once if you can hear me, clap twice if you can.
All right, okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I wanted to make a quick announcement. Mario Barnes, your phone is where exactly? Where's the phone? At the front desk. What's the front desk? Oh, the reception desk. Okay, got it. So there we go. So it's an honor to sit here with all of you alongside my CRT heroes and sheroes. And like Tendai said, it's really a privilege to surround myself with such brilliant and incredible scholars and advocates every day. Sometimes I wake up and I'm like, oh, I teach at UCLA with the most incredible people that I can imagine. And also, not just brilliant scholars, but also loving people who care about you and who, will go to bat and do the hard things for you. And I really appreciate that. And so I just say that to say, like, we're in a legacy of 25 years of CRS, but I really take to heart Tendai's mentioning of being born free, and this is really, what is our generation going to do? And I think that's a call to action that I'm trying to wear right now in my post-tenure at UCLA kind of phase. So, all right, let's get to business. All right, so the title of this plenary was decided prior to January 2025. And as a member of the planning committee, I couldn't have predicted the transformative moment that we would find ourselves in. Some would say that, we are definitely in a moment of regression and retrenchment, but for some people who've been waiting on the sidelines for this exact moment, this is a transformative moment for them. And so it's our difficult job on this panel to highlight the praxis that informs CRT and the way CRT informs practice. As others have already mentioned, these are not siloed endeavors. CRT and CRS CRT is born from practice. The theory comes from practice, and CRT in turn informs practice in US courtrooms, in grassroots movements, and even globally around the world. So I want to bring us full circle to remind us of something that Professor Cheryl Harris said last night when she reminded us, by quoting Gramsci, that we are in the interregnum. And as such, we are in a point of instability that creates also moments of opportunity. So however small these opportunities are, however much we feel paralyzed, we feel afraid, these incredible panelists are doing the hard work against all the odds and fighting in the interregnum to try to reimagine a different world and seize opportunities as big and small as they might be. So we will present an honest picture of the landscape, the challenges we face from, as someone said earlier in a plenary, our allies and friends, right? It's not just MAGA that we're fighting against, it's sometimes our allies and friends. And then the realities of the Supreme Court majority that's willing to go along with the MAGA agenda, and also the weak institutions that won't stand up in moments of crisis. So we're going to do this in 3 rounds. So just to explain the run of show, the first round is going to be very brief. We're going to show a photo, and each panelist is going to describe the problem that they are going to discuss as part of their intervention. The second round is going to provide an analysis of the problem. And then the third round, where we're going to spend the majority of our time, we're going to talk about what we're doing about it. All right, so let's get started. Thank you so much. In this first round, each panelist is going to give us a short description of an image to illustrate a piece of the crisis that we find ourselves in. They will describe the problem and really try not to provide analysis in this round. And I'm going to ask them to stay brief, since after all, this is a panel where we're supposed to provide strategies, reframing, and suggestions to move us forward. We've spent a lot of today thinking about the problem, so we are eager to think about strategies. So the first, I'm going to turn it over. We're going to go in this order. Please just introduce yourselves. All the bios are in the program already, so just introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Sunita said this was going to be 3 minutes, this first round, for each of us. So I will just briefly say my name is Ahilin Aralanandam. I'm the faculty co-director of the Center for Immigration Law and Policy at UCLA School of Law. And what you're looking at there is one map amongst a number of maps on a website that our center recently launched called Mapping Deportations. And it's a collaboration between ourselves and the $1 Million Hoods Project, which is a creature of Kelly Lytle Hernandez, a remarkable historian here at UCLA, and also Mariah So, who's a Diné cartographer. And what we did together was build a website based around a new data set, which is every federal deportation order, grouped by country since 1895, which is when the government started keeping sort of collective data on federal deportations. And there's a bunch of maps and also timeline and lots of stuff on the website, but I picked that one because it really illustrates the basic point that I was going to make in the remaining 1 minute and 45 seconds that I have. Mass deportation is a project of racial engineering. That's what it is. It's a project to engineer the racial composition of the United States. And what that map shows is that 96% of all deportations from the very beginning have been to non-white, non-European countries. 88% of them have been to Mexico and Central America. And I think that you can just look at that. The rules change. The immigration law scholars in the room will tell you they're changing every day. They changed in the last 3 weeks. But the core effects remain remarkably constant, not perfectly constant, certainly, but remarkably constant. And I think one effect is to exclude Latino people, you could say. There's a huge part of the project to just exclude them from the United States. Since 1916, Mexico has been the largest recipient of deportations continuously the entire time. It's also massively disproportionate. So if you look on the map, you'll see there are as many deportations to the Caribbean region as to Europe, also as many to Asia as to Europe, even though admissions, of course, from Europe swamp those from those other places over the same periods of time. So she said no analysis, so I will give no analysis as to, but I will also say that this data doesn't run actually to now, obviously, but what we're living in now is a period of very intense, that right there, sort of on steroids, although there have been other periods in the past which are sort of comparable. It's a great time if you're a white South African farmer to be an immigrant to the United States. It's about the same if you're Ukrainian or you're Russian, but if you're from Haiti, Venezuela, a bunch of Central American countries, or if you're walking around Los Angeles, brown, not so good. And I'll get more into that in the next round.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Kim Crenshaw. I am so happy to be here. This it's why I will never leave. They're going to have to drag me out of here. And, just right here, the gang's all here. It's like the Beatles got back together again. I'm so excited. Okay, so I used 15 seconds. So my slides are basically the culmination of a double retrenchment. One of the things that any student of critical race theory knows is that after race reform comes retrenchment. We're actually in the throes of a second retrenchment, the first one, of course, being as a response to Barack Obama's election. We'll talk more in a bit about how our response to that, or how the liberal response to that perhaps was the wrong diagnosis. But now we're in a second retrenchment. It just so happens that critical race theory plays a starring role in this moment. It is the vehicle by which Christian white nationalism has come to the center and to redefine the center of American politics. And one might ask, how did that happen? Here are some of the receipts. It was an intentional gentrification of the ideas of critical race theory. We have the receipts here with Christopher Rufo basically saying that to sow dissension and discord, to take over public education, we are going to weaponize critical race theory to that end. So he's clear here in saying that there is an intention to misdirect, to use the framework that many of us in this room spent our careers developing for particular ends. He was going to be able, along with an extraordinarily well-organized and well-funded campaign, to redirect that. So what I want to talk about is, how did that happen? In the second round, I'll say more about the fact that I don't spend a whole lot of time debating the MAGA faction. The real call is coming from inside the House. And for those of you who know what that refers to, you know that we're going to be talking about internal politics to the liberal progressive faction in American society.
Everyone's being very disciplined. Okay.
You sound surprised.
We had very strict instructions from our moderator. So great to be with everyone here and be back home here at CRS. My name is Saul Saravia, and I had the privilege of serving as the first CRS program director, working directly with the students and any alum who are here. I just want to thank you for coming back. So the image that you all see above me, should be seeing above me, is of course the largest prison in the Americas and one of the largest in the world. This institution is named the Center for the Confinement of Terrorism, known by its Spanish acronym as CECOT. And it is in the Central American country of El Salvador. And I know many of you in this room were familiar with it when most Americans discovered earlier this year that this was a modern-day gulag, and that this got erected by El Salvador's own authoritarian project, led by President Bukele and his supporters and his party members in the National Assembly. It is a facility that has capacity for up to 40,000 people. We do not know currently how many people there are actually there, because the Salvadoran government's position is that to provide regular, accurate numbers would be a threat to public safety. And it was erected as part of a campaign that the authoritarians in El Salvador represented as the public safety solution to deal with the two main gangs, Mara Salvatrucha and 18th Street, which are actually LA-based gangs that our laws exported through a project of mass deportation I'll be talking about a little bit more during my talk. What I wanted to highlight for our discussion is that the CECOT is only one leg in the repressive project in El Salvador, and for us to think about how it relates, of course, to what we're living through here. And that is that the legal regime that was instituted at the same time that this was built was what was deemed the state of exception, a state of emergency that essentially justified suspension of basic constitutional protections for Salvadorans. And this included the lifting of a 72-hour limit on the right to detention. And this dragnet has actually led to the incarceration of 80,000 people that are not in the CECOT, that are in other maximum security prisons under allegations that they are somehow tied to the terrorist threat that is represented by these two gangs. So I will stay within my time and leave it there for now.
Hi, everyone. A pleasure to be here today. My name is Caleb Jackson. I'm a CRS alum, class of 2018. I currently work in the Senate. I won't say the senator I work for because I don't want them to associate everything I say with him, which they're going to do anyway. But I've been on Senate Judiciary Committee for about the past 2 years, which, as people know, handles judicial nominations and most of the issues that we're discussing here today. This is actually a painting from Jacob Lawrence sometime between 1940 and 1941. And it was part of a 60-part series called the Migration Series. And this painting was a part of that series, which he kind of created to show the Black experience in the South at that time as people were migrating from the South to the North. And he included captions along with the paintings And I'll just read the caption for this one, which I think is really relevant today, not only for Black people, but for, obviously, brown people and other people of color here in the United States. So the caption for this one is, among the social conditions that existed, which was partly the cause of the migration, in this case, the Great Migration, again, of Black people from the South to the North, was the injustice done to the Negroes in the courts. And so, again, this was not 2025, this was 1940, 1941. And the reason I picked this painting is because I think it's really relevant today to what we're seeing from this 6-3 court, and relevant to what the administration has been able to accomplish so quickly this go-round, as opposed to what they were able to accomplish in the first administration. As many people remember, I was in law school. I remember like the day Justice Scalia passed, right? When Trump first got in office, he did not have a majority on the Supreme Court. And so while they definitely let far too many of his policies go forward, there was a stopgap. That stopgap no longer exists, and we're watching the court kind of use cases. We discussed the Kavanaugh concurrence. We obviously, I'm sure a lot of folks heard Janae Nelson, another alum, do a brilliant job arguing Louisiana v. Calais. But we're hearing the court in these arguments, in these decisions, try to basically tell Black people, tell brown people that the time is up. We don't want you here. For immigrants, they're telling them leave the country. For Black people, they're telling them leave their institutions, leave the political process. And so that theme is kind of what I'll be discussing throughout our discussion today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sandy Hudson. I'm an alum, class of 22. And I'm a writer, and I'm an activist, and I do nonprofit management of an organization back in my hometown in Toronto. And I just want to say, first of all, does somebody just woo for Toronto? Okay, the Jays! The Jays! Am I right? Okay, that's over now. Apologies. I have 3 minutes. First of all, I want to say that it's such a pleasure to be back here. And honestly, I wasn't sure if this was going to go on. I didn't know if this symposium would happen. Given everything that I was seeing, given what I've seen at other institutions, I talk at universities a lot. And I went to McGill to speak the week that Charlie Kirk was killed. And they moved at McGill University in Montreal, in Canada, they moved my talk into a small room where everybody had to register in order to go. It was supposed to be an outside orientation thing. Like, I am, first of all, so grateful for this program and for the fact that this has been allowed to continue. And that's what I'm going to be talking about, because what this photo represents, I don't need to do too much to explain it. Our rights and our freedoms are being curtailed. They're being seriously curtailed. We're at an emergency situation. And for me, I've been thinking a lot deeply, as someone who's a writer, right? So I work from home, and I'm thinking a lot. I've been thinking a lot about what is our responsibility at a time like this. Those of us, there's a lot of privilege in this room. There's a lot of privilege in this room, and I say that, as a Black immigrant, there's a lot of privilege in this room. For those of us who have the power that we have, when we're looking around and saying, yeah, shit's not good. What are we called to do in this moment? What is our responsibility in this moment? We have the kind of knowledge that is so specialized, and that doesn't exist everywhere, despite what the right will tell you about critical race theory, right? We have very specialized knowledge and very specialized understanding of what is happening and about this moment of retrenchment. I remember in 2020 being scared about what comes next because we understand this moment. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about with my time.
All right, so I am very proud of our panelists for being good students and sticking with the time. This next round, they're going to have a little bit more spaciousness, I would say. But in this round, each panelist is going to take us to the next level and tell us what we need to know about the image. What about the image, the problem or the phenomena, have we missed in the traditional viewing of the idea, right? What may not meet the eye? So this time I'm going to actually ask Professor Crenshaw to start, and then we're going to move to Ahilan, and then Sandy, and then Saul. So I'll remind you of the order, but Professor Crenshaw, you can start us off.
All right. So I'm going to start with what I consider to be a misdiagnosis, an encouragement to tie our hands behind our backs as we face this retrenchment. How do you complete this sentence for me? When they go low, we do. Okay, let's say 2012. When they go low, we go high. What the hell was that? I mean, they were going low, and we were still allowing the framework to be post-racialism. Now, I'm saying broadly, sort of liberal progressives. Those of us who say we do critical race theory, we're saying, what are you talking about? There is nothing post about this moment. The problem was, of course, that the anti-Obama, what eventually became the MAGA army, was deeply organizing. They were, of course, building on anti-Obama politics, building on birtherism, building on the great replacement fears. This was the moment in which that organizing was happening, while at the same time, mainstream discourse about race was fading from the pages of the paper of record, fading from discussion on anything other than pretty much MSNBC. So there was this moment where the idea was, we're going to fake it until we make it. We know that it's not really post-racial, but that's the name of the game right now. I want to say that was not only a mistake then, it's a mistake that keeps on giving. Because now we're in a moment, well, let me say what happened in between. In between was, of course, the backlash. Then comes Trump. Then comes the moment where Trump promises the Proud Boys, stand by, I got something for you. And within a month, that something for you was an executive order that basically weaponized critical thinking about race, the 1619 Project, and anything that drew attention to racial injustice as in and of itself racism. And that became an executive order that not only applied to federal governments and agencies, but even those institutions that actually got federal grants. So the Urban League, for example, or the National Fair Housing Center could not talk about structural racism and still expect to get their grants. That was just the moment that showed what the potential of weaponizing critical thinking about race could actually do. Now, of course, he lost that election. And there were those who said, this is a mere distraction. Don't worry about it. We don't have to organize around it. That was the second mistake. Because by that time, the horse had gotten out the barn, and across the country, more than 25 states adopted these divisive concept laws, which actually weaponized the teaching of critical ideas about race. Now, here's the thing that I agree 100% with that happened this morning. These laws are so vague, and they're intentionally vague because they want people to over-discipline themselves. They want people not to say the things that need to be said. They want people to just guess that any conversation about race is now verboten. And that's effectively what we have at this moment. Now, I have said that some part of the problem is that the call is coming from inside the House. Some part of the problem is not just people being overwhelmed. It's people saying, you know what, I wasn't that crazy about talking about this stuff that much anyway. Some people who are saying, you know what, the conversation about race actually deflects some of the attention from the real issues that count, which are class issues. Now, I want to say that what's new is very old. This was the point of departure that critical race theory started with. It was when our progressive allies, when we said, hey, if the whole point of theorization is to theorize power where you are, let's theorize racial power right here within critical legal studies, and they about lost their minds. So the resistance to, the discomfort with talking about racial power is not simply a problem on the MAGA side of the line. It has always been a problem on the progressive side of the line. That's the chicken that's coming home to roost right now.
Do you want to move the next one? Or,
Yes.
thank you.
I got carried away.
The piece of the puzzle that I would say perhaps people are not entirely seeing, although it's not like it's completely missing it, is that I think there's actually two different related authoritarian moves that are happening in this moment. One obviously is the centralization of power by the Trump administration and the very explicit advancement of white supremacy, which I know as the manifestation of it I know is through the mass deportation project that I was talking about. But there's a separate move that's also happening, which is happening in the Supreme Court, and that is the Supreme Court is actually engaged in a massive power grab that's happening over the last several months. It's changing the structure of our government in a very basic way. And the power grab is that the Supreme Court wants to arrogate for itself to be the only court that has the power to stop widespread illegal activity by the government. I've seen it very clearly in cases involving race discrimination claims that we've tried to litigate in response to the immigration stuff, which I'll talk about in a second. But I think it's actually a more general point, because it's also true of the firing of federal workers, it's true of the cuts to foreign aid. It's possible that this is just like only for when there's a Republican president, and it'll go back, to the way it was when there's a Democratic president. It's possible. But it's also possible, well, First of all, it's possible there's going to be Republican presidents for a while, is one thing, But even that aside, I think it's also possible that it's just like a more basic shift, and it means something really profound about how our legal system works, because it means that this huge set of actors that exist in the legal system, which I'm talking about district courts and circuit courts to some extent, which had the ability to stop illegal government action on a wide scale, that's going away. The slide here shows the immigration shadow docket cases since 2025, and I should have changed this to say Noam v. NTPSA twice, because I've lost that case in the shadow docket in the Supreme Court twice in the last 6 months, which is kind of mind-boggling. The ones on the left are ones where the Supreme Court actually did not rule entirely for the Trump administration. They're the first two Alien Enemy Act cases, which I think Saul is going to talk about more. That's the people being sent to Sicot. And the third one is Abrego Garcia, who's another person also sent to Sicot, who's a Salvadoran. And in all of those cases, the Supreme Court did something wishy-washy, but they said, due process is required. So it was not entirely against in favor of the Trump administration. The details are not worth going into now, but the ones on the other side are ones where the court, with no explanation, actually, I'm sorry, this is slightly, 4 of the 5 are ones where, with no explanation at all, the court reversed or stayed orders that had protected, between them, several million people from deportation. The first one, known via TPSA, was a ruling that it was illegal for the government to strip more than 1 million people from Haiti and Venezuela of temporary protected status, which is a status that allowed them to live and work in this country and escape detention and deportation. The Supreme Court reversed that in a 1-paragraph order that had no reasoning in it. That 1-paragraph order with no reasoning was the single largest de-documentation event in the history of U.S. immigration law. 350,000 people lost their immigration status in the moment that order came down, and there was no explanation for it. And then they did the same thing again 6 months later. The 5th one down there is the LA Raids case. And in that case, there was extensive evidence in the district court that the government was using race explicitly, stopping people all over the streets of Los Angeles, the same thing they're doing now, still in Los Angeles, but also in Chicago and also in D.C. And the Supreme Court the opinion for the court just said it was okay. It just stayed the decision. Again, gave no reasoning. Justice Kavanaugh wrote this concurrence, which I'm sure most people in this room have heard about, that explicitly suggested it was okay to use race to stop people. Right? These are illegal under existing law. It had actually been illegal to use race to engage in a stop for 25 years under Ninth Circuit law in the immigration context. Okay. The TPS case, there's a 79-page opinion explaining in great detail why it was illegal, including, by the way, on race grounds, because the government was invoking the invasion from the invasion executive orders, blatantly racist account, as the rationale for what it was doing. And the Supreme Court stopped it without giving any explanation. So this is a separate autocratic move that's also really important. And that's, I think, what is to some extent missing from at least some of our analyses of these.
Sandy?
Okay. Yeah, Professor Crenshaw, I want to add to some of your intervention because I know we're on the same wave here. One of the things that I think is a huge issue is our resistance to the nervousness that people have about addressing the issue and confronting the issue that faces us, which is a fascist takeover of the United States. And I think that people aren't really aware of how expansive the consequences for that are. I mean, people know, that this is an international issue, but there was another image that I had shared of the Canadian Parliament giving a standing ovation to Charlie Kirk when he died. I don't know if people know that sort of thing is happening as well. And the reason is because the U.S. is so powerful globally that it's flexing its power, enforcing other governments to also bend to the fascist will. And so what does that mean? Well, this week, for example, in Canada, there was an announcement to hire thousands more border officials, thousands more federal officers to assist in policing the border. Why is this important? In particular, it's because one of the other things that happened under the Trump administration is the removal of the temporary protected status for a number of people seeking asylum. They forced Canada to remove those temporary protected statuses too. So if people are trying to cross the border to free themselves, well, they can find themselves right back in immigrant detention in the United States as a result. And so I think it's really crucial for us to make sure that we're expanding our understanding of this issue. It isn't just local and domestic. It is something that is much broader than that in ways that we may not have thought about. One of the other things that I think is really critical for us to consider, given that, is let's think a little bit back in history, because we are fighting people who are amongst us as well. I wonder right now, where we would be if in 2020 we had actually had a complete conversation about policing and weren't so concentrated on fighting with one another about, well, how good are the police? Can we keep these things of the police? And all those types of frustrating conversations that we had that now lead us to a place where you can be listening to political pundits talking about how we went too far in 2020, talking about all of these cultural issues, like the issues of policing is something that's just about culture. I don't understand how people are talking about it like that. Mm-hmm. And then it leads to a justification of, well, if policing isn't bad, well, then what is the problem with ICE? What is the problem with having more policing on our streets to just make us more safe? And for someone like me who's an abolitionist, I was just so distressed at the fact that there was so much time spent, wasted, arguing with one another. And I wonder where we would be collectively on our understanding about race and anti-racism if people didn't have to fight one another to get the critical race studies program in this institution. It's really, really frustrating to see, again, people who are in power, people who have privilege. The academic community's response to fascism has been not great. You know, and these are like some of the most powerful people in our society. Like, what are we called to? Again, we really need to consider, what are we called to do in this moment? There's a large attack on our freedoms and First Amendment freedoms in particular. The Trump administration has been talking about going after activists who have been doing work to oppose some of the fascism that we're seeing, the racism, the anti-blackness, the anti-immigration, all the stuff that we're seeing. They're talking about RICO charges against these folks. I mean, they're serious. They're serious. I know of people personally, this hasn't come out yet. I know of people personally who have started to be investigated by the FBI, who are just activists. That's where we are. That is going to be more public in about a month or so, I can imagine. So this is really serious. What are we called to do in this moment as people who have privilege? And I'll say more on that in a bit.
Oh.
Yes, go ahead.
Me?
Oh, sorry, it's Saul.
Saul, thank you. Okay, thank you. Just setting up my Sunita stopwatch here because she's
Hardcore.
she's really great. Okay, so Sekod. I won't say much about the cases that you all know a lot about. Many Americans became familiar with the Sekod earlier this year when the Trump administration engaged in two high-profile cases of deportation to the Sekod. The first is the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who the White House had accused of being a member of the transnational Salvadoran gang MS-13, which it had designated as a foreign terrorist organization and said he would never live in the U.S. again. The judges all the way up to the Supreme Court ruled that he was deported in error and that the U.S. should facilitate his return back home to Maryland. Latest announcement, I think, as earlier this morning, is the White House is saying that Abrego Garcia, that Liberia is willing to take him upon deportation. The second case involves more than 250 Venezuelan men, which the Trump administration accused but didn't provide any proof of belonging to the Tren de Aragua gang, a gang in Venezuela. The Trump administration used a combination of existing U.S. immigration laws and centuries-old wartime law called the Alien Enemies Act to detain and deport people that they claimed to be part of this gang, and it claimed without evidence that these members this gang was invading the U.S., and therefore that could trigger the use of this particular law. On Tuesday of this week, the government said it would place the 18th Street Gang on a list alongside those organizations like MS-13 and Tren de Aragua. Previously, this designation was typically used for groups such as the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, that use violence from their perspective as political ends. I think it's very important to tie these moves between criminalization, foreign and alien, and terrorist, and to learn from the era, the post 9/11 era. And I want to highlight a couple of things that helped me in doing organizing around these stigmas. One is the call in critical race theory to historicize and to contextualize. And so if we're going to talk about Central America, I would point all of you to Laura Gomez's Inventing Latinos, which gives you a broad historical description of how the extractive relationship between the U.S. and European colonizers have essentially created a necessary labor pool from those countries and this country to continue to extract wealth from these populations. And I'm surprised often in the organizing world how little time is dedicated to historicizing and contextualizing situations that we're living in now, which I think can make a huge difference. And I think when I get asked, can you come and describe, what's important about CRT, right now, I just lift up the historians and I say, we have actually been here before. In our history, I would just like to also describe to you what it was like to be here when the first Muslim and South Asian students who had been junior high school students and high school students during 9/11 reached law school, and how they came here and transformed this institution and this program. Because as we're talking about a new executive order that would make extreme views on gender and race suspect for national security threats, we have to remember that this is the group of people that have already had to organize when the government began to use terms like unindicted co-conspirators, when people like Asla Bali, who we were lucky to have come in that same period and had litigated cases that emerged out of that time period, created in our program something that Black, Brown, and API students who had intervened around the curriculum here in the 60s, which is you can't have just a few of us here, and you can't have people who have nobody on the faculty who's actually theorizing and talking about how this looks in law and on the ground. When I came back here, there were CRS and Muslim Law Student Association students who had to question whether or not they should put that they had been part of these organizations or specializations on their resume. We have been here before, and the response to that was an incredible transformation that they did, self-organizing courses like a law student group studying the global war on terror, and forcing us in the program to look at how this could impact and expand the critical race framework. Thank you.
And so I think, that's a good segue, talking about history. Because I think when we describe the court, some of what they're doing is unprecedented, but to be frank, a lot of it is very precedented. Specifically, what they're doing when it comes to race-conscious remedies right now. And so this came up again in Louisiana v. Calais in the oral argument last week. We know it came up in SFFA. One thing Kavanaugh keeps returning to is this idea that race-conscious remedies, unlike any other remedies, should be time-limited. He said even last week, kind of in an exchange, that at some point, hasn't this court always held that at some point all remedies, all legal protections that seek to benefit people of color at some point must end, because that contrasts with this colorblind theory of the Constitution. And I did take a look. I'm like, what was the first Supreme Court case that said that? And sadly, it was literally 18 years after emancipation. And so if we look at the civil rights cases, this is 1883. This is kind of a famous passage, but I don't think it gets enough attention. In the majority opinion, they say, in this case, as folks in this room I'm sure know, was a case where they held that the Reconstruction amendments could govern government action, but they could not govern private action, right? So your railroad stations, other privately held companies, passageways, could not be forced to end discrimination. And what the majority opinion said was where a man has emerged from slavery and by the aid of beneficent legislation has shaken off the concomitants of that state, there must be some stage in the progress of his elevation when he ceases to be the special favorite of the laws. Wow. This is 1883. This is like, I'm from Texas, so like slaves in Texas got freed in 1865. This is like 18 years later, right? But this is exactly what the Supreme Court is saying today. When it comes to voting rights, right? Everyone knows about Shelby County v. Holder. Literally like 2-3 years ago, we thought Section 2 was safe in the Milligan case out of Alabama. And now somehow, very similar case out of Louisiana, the court is now saying that, oh, actually, maybe we got that wrong. Maybe even Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which, if we're talking about precedent, even conservative majority opinions have said that section is permanent. Maybe it is no longer the time for that remedy, because that is a remedy that makes black people the special favorite. Why should we be drawing congressional districts that look at that are seen as majority minority districts? In the affirmative action case, it's a very similar kind of theory, right? Like, okay, yeah, we saw it, obviously, 25 years before SFFA in a previous decision. But in SFFA, they looked back to that and said, all right, time is up, right? That's basically what we see the court saying. And we know that this is going to be devastating, already is devastating for our community. Speaking of like just kind of anecdotes, I previously worked for Senator LaFonza Butler before my current senator, and one of our interns is president of the Black Student Movement at UNC Chapel Hill. He texted me like 2 weeks ago and said that UNC locked them out of a Black student space on campus that they'd had since 1972. And so what we're seeing, you know, people often describe it as this anti-DEI rollback. This is like way before DEI. DEI is like 20 years max, right? This is literally stuff that like our parents, like some people's grandparents, I'm sure the current law students here, grandparents, fought for and won. And these battles these hard fought battles are being undone. And we are like really in scary times. So I'll try to paint a more optimistic picture in the last round, but just want to make sure we are like being accurate and really focusing on how bad it's gotten and how much bad it's going to get if we don't start reversing some of this right now.
Okay, well, with that honest presentation of the current fascist moment we're in, we're going to, in this last round, have everyone tell us what they are doing about the problem and the issue that they identified. And I want to start here with Professor Crenshaw again and say that, sorry, this is just the way it works out. Okay, the scholars of fascism and autocracy have noted that one of the hardest things to push back against when we think about the authoritarian playbook is fighting against culture change and narrative. Can you talk about how your important work at preserving and uplifting stories are really part of the fight against racial fascism?
Okay. Well, I'll start by building off what Saul said about the importance, the urgency of historicizing this contextual moment. And the work that we do is all about trying to preserve the historical narrative so people can understand what time it is. That's the basic value of critical race theory. I didn't say something about the earlier slide, so I'll use this opportunity to connect. So my earlier slide, that one slide is hands off, right? That is from the April 5th. Rally. If you actually look at it, you see all sorts of issues being listed with the exception of racial justice. It's like the one that cannot be touched. And so we've had conversations with organizers to say, look, if you don't understand the role that racism has played, and now I'm going to be specific historically, the role of anti-blackness in undermining and breaking this democracy, if you don't understand that that's playing out again, then you're missing the historical narrative. And what we get back often is, well, we're trying to elevate issues around which we think there is, a critical mass. So it's basically telling us, get ready to be disenfranchised because your issue doesn't have the staying power that other issues do. That we've seen before. That's the whole thing, that's the repetition. So we found this slide beside it, which comes from 1915. This is from the progressives, right? Never forget, the progressives were the ones that resegregated the federal government. The progressives were the one that said, Reconstruction went too far. The progressives were the ones that said, we got to get beyond the weight of the Civil War and this black stuff and get to the real. Does that sound familiar? And what we're hearing now, so a lot of our work is designed to address that gap, that resistance to actually embracing what the historical narrative tells us about what happens when we marginalize conversations about the issues that have always broken our democracy. So some of the things that we've been doing have been to basically occupy that space, linking critical concepts to active engagement in the political sphere. So, number one, this spring, Trump signed another executive order denouncing improper ideologies. The improper ideologies include the idea that race is a social construct. Let me just repeat that again. The improper ideology is that race is a social concept. So what does that mean? It means the proper ideology is that race is biological. The inference of that, to that, from that, is that racial inequality is also natural. And the conclusion is that those efforts to address racial inequality are preferential treatment, reverse discrimination. This is the right-wing dream, to be able to establish that as the national story about racial inequality. So that is the executive order that's now being taken to the Smithsonian, to the Blacksonian, the museum that tells the story about American slavery, tells the story about why we have so much inequality, tells the story about why the imperatives of the Voting Rights Act and Title VII and the original vision of the 14th Amendment are still an imperative. So the idea is to erase our ability to even say those things. And in case we're unclear about it, they have a list of all the things that you can no longer say and think you're going to get a government grant. Guess what's on the list? Race, racism, black women, implicit bias, Jerry. All of these things that help us tell the story. So our goal is to, first of all, make it clear that what they are pushing for is illiteracy. What they are pushing for is silence. What they're pushing for is erasure. And when our colleagues bend the knee and kiss the ring and say, we're just doing this to live to fight another day, recognize they're not fighting for us. They're living for themselves to fight another day. So a lot of our work is designed to build the infrastructure, the connections, the community that is necessary to tell that story. We do Freedom to Learn every May 3rd, in which we push back on institutions like the College Board, $1.5 billion organization that bent the knee to erase intersectionality, structural racism, Black Lives Matter from a Black Studies curriculum that was made possible by the Black Lives Matter movement. Idea being, if we agree to this, the course will go through. Guess what? They rejected the course anyway, right? So we do that. We also do a Mellon project, and I'm really pleased that some of our Mellon scholars are here, Russell, a few other folks. And the point of that was to build an interface between critical race theory and the humanities. Because the point was that critical race theory has a lot to offer and learns a lot from across the curriculum, but the opportunities to actually create those connections weren't often funded. So Mellon has given us resources to bring historians together, philosophers together in conversation with lawyers so we can tell a better story so people understand that what we're doing, what we're dealing with was something that has already happened before. Recognize Reconstruction ended not just because the South had its way, but because the North allowed them to. So we have to be able to tell these stories. We have the receipts. We do that work. And last but not least is the work of connecting with leading public officials, those who are trying to hold power in the face of efforts to deny it. We've been to Tennessee for 2 years with our critical race studies project. It's now in its 6th year. We have reached 2,500 people who were not able to come here to learn critical race theory, but now learn it to advance the work that they're doing in refusing to erase the history that informs this moment.
It's such important work because Tennessee is really ground zero in so many ways. So I want to turn next to Caleb and Ahilan. So they are really doing the most with very little. So here I want to link your comments to that of Addie in our last plenary, who, as the current faculty director of the Public Interest Law program here, I just warmed my heart that she shouted out her experience as a PILP alum, and mentioned the important lessons that she learned around the multiple tools in our lawyering toolboxes and the way CRT informs those tools. So whether it's litigation, media, or policy advocacy, how is your work using CRT to engage in advocacy in the current moment? What are the even small fissures and gains that we can expect today? Ahilan, you want to go first? Or Caleb, why don't you go first?
You go ahead.
Yeah, I can start off. So, obviously, it can be difficult working in Congress where literally the government is shut down, so not much gets done. But I'm going to use an example from last year that I think it was local and state, but a federal official was able to influence that process, and it was ultimately successful. So I don't know if people tracked the story in Palm Springs of Section 14. So there was a Black and Latinx neighborhood in Palm Springs that was basically razed, ultimately burned after the people were kicked out of that community. And those people were never paid for their homes. Those people were never relocated. And it was like, we're talking like almost 1,000 people, right? And so an attorney, this is also a good example of like using multiple areas of the law to achieve change. An attorney, Ariva Martin, sued the city of Palm Springs to make sure that they paid not only the survivors, but the descendants for those who's, the original homeowners who were no longer here. During that process, they got to a negotiation point with the city where the mayor and the city council started looking like they were going to be willing to give, reparative payments, but they hit kind of a sticking point. And at that point, Senator Butler, who I used to work for, got involved. And so this is, another good example. So she sent a letter to the mayor of Palm Springs and the city council, basically not saying how much you need to give them, not saying that if you don't do this, then X, but basically saying, I'm watching this process. It is my hope that you all will make them whole. And, this is something that needs to happen. I actually ended up meeting on Senator Butler's behalf with the mayor, with the city council, virtually, to discuss this, to talk it over. And I can say, obviously, there was a lot that went into this. Again, there was a lawsuit. There were organizers on the ground, so I'm not going to say this was all our work. But it was announced last week that the payments finally went out to the families and descendants. So, but I raised that because, again, working in Congress, right, I think I definitely came with this idea that, I'm going to come into the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I guess I came in when Democrats were in the majority. So I'm like, we're going to confirm a Supreme Court justice. Now I pray that there's not a vacancy, at least for the next 4 years. Or we say, we're going to pass this landmark federal legislation that's going to change the lives of people across the country. But that was a very specific example of a federal official who at that time was the only Black woman in the Senate, using her power in a way that benefited, again, almost 1,000 Black and brown folks. Another reason I want to highlight that example is because I think, or I'm hopeful, again, I was very pessimistic and I'm trying to be optimistic here. I think that the Palm Springs Section 14 example really actually presents a path forward. So out of SFFA, right, the affirmative action case, there is like a small sliver of potential race-conscious remedies that can be allowed to move forward, though I have not seen any university try in earnest to accomplish that. So in the arguments and then ultimately in decision, there seemed to be room, right, for specific universities, so not an entire state, not nationwide, but specific universities to continue addressing specific harm that happened on their campus in a very specific way. And I think that this Palm Springs Section 14 example is a perfect descriptor, a perfect kind of model for that, because this was a situation where what happened was well documented. The newspapers at the time had documented it. People and the stories, mind you, it's Palm Springs. It's not like, and these weren't like black newspaper writers, but the way that they had described exactly what happened was in pretty stark terms, right? And so people were able to go back, look at the documents, pull the records, and show, no, we know these specific people lived in these specific houses. We know the city was involved. We know the city had the fire department come and like raise these homes, right? And so there was a huge line of documentation that allowed that race-conscious remedy to ultimately come into play. But it was based on specific evidence that was well documented. I think, my last piece, and another reason I'm optimistic, it's kind of crazy because it's like the racism is out of control right now. It's like brazen, it's next level. But I do think that maybe could lead to an opportunity, again, not with this court, but with a future court. Because one thing we're seeing in the digital age is that, to be honest, there's a lot of evidence of intentional discrimination. These people are sending texts. You got DMs. I don't know why they're like so willing to just put their racism in writing. But I do think that this presents an opportunity, again, not under this court, but in the future, for us to potentially redress not just the past discrimination, not just things that happened a long time ago, but really things that are happening right now with this Trump administration. We know they are specifically targeting immigrant communities. We know they are targeting black communities. And I am certain, I'm 100% certain that there is a ton of evidence of what they're doing. There's evidence of their intent. They're not, think about like things like the Chris Rufo tweet, which Kim showed earlier. Like, there unfortunately is a lot of evidence of their discrimination. And I think that the Palm Springs Section 14 model could be a model in the future, once we get out of this very ugly and dark period, for us to redress the very act of harm that is happening to our communities right now in this moment.
Perfect segue.
I mean, what I'm doing to pick up the first prompt, I have not taught for the last year, and I've just been litigating. And although it has been brutal in some ways, a very frustrating experience, it has not in any way shaken my belief in the importance of litigation. In fact, I would say, if anything, the opposite. I mean, institution in this country is failing. And to a large extent, not completely, but to a large extent, the lower federal courts are not. And although large-scale, class-wide or mass kind of relief is being shut down, as I was describing, at the outset by the Supreme Court, lots and lots of judges are continuing to enforce the law and do what they can to try and vindicate people's rights. Now, I'll give you one just very concrete example. Well, let me just say then, so to the PILP program and to the students out there and to the people who teach litigation and do litigation, people in the immigrants' rights movement, the groups, they need more litigators coming into the pipeline. We need it. We absolutely need it. I'll give you just one example. The order, the second time we won the order declaring the Venezuelan termination of TPS illegal, it lasted for something like a month. And at first the government didn't comply, but then they did. And then, because we forced them to, because we filed a motion to enforce the order. And then there was about a 3-week-ish period when the order was in effect. And the administration did nothing on its own to implement it. So they didn't give any advice to the field or anything saying that you had to release all these people. There's Venezuelans holding a card which says that they have status, which means they cannot be detained, and the law says they shall not be detained, and the government did nothing. So people started filing habeas petitions to get them out and threatening to file them. And our center, just 2 attorneys in our center, actually, one of whom is here, actually, Sofia Lopez Franco there in the back, just on our own, we got 85 people out of detention in about a 2.5-week period. They did, actually, just that period. And that's like, yeah. It's like 85 people returned to their families. Very difficult for them to then come back into the crosshairs. Some have, but many have not. Most have not. And we also sent a template out, and other immigrants' rights lawyers all around the country did this. Hundreds of people actually were in that position. I also think it's true that you have to force the court into the contradictions of confronting its lawlessness. And we're not done. We're doing other weird things to try and force the courts to explain why they can't remedy this blatantly unlawful action. So I've actually spent the last, 6 weeks or something doing this deep dive into the distinctions between declaratory relief and injunctive relief. This is not a good advertisement for the students, is it? It doesn't sound that exciting.
I was getting excited.
You were? Okay. And set-asides under the APA and how they could have preclusive effect so that you could tie the hands of other judges individually without having, and this is hyper-technical law, but this is the way our system is set up. Like, this is the currency of how you actually bring liberation to people. Not the only way, definitely not the only way, and its benefits can be overstated for sure, I'm the first to tell you, but it is a crucial currency to bringing liberation to people in this moment. So that's the first thing I would say. The window is getting narrower and narrower. We need huge structural reform of the type that other people Kim and others have talked about, but still, this is one way in which you can really do a lot to help people. Beyond that, I've learned more about and also just been really impressed by what I've seen of very, very local organizing of immigrant protection kind of networks, local patrols, neighborhood patrols, adopting a corner, monitoring a Home Depot. And these are amazing sets of organizing that's happened. The group I've worked most closely with is the National Day Labor Organizing Network and the National TPS Alliance kind of working together because I've represented them for a number of years. They're doing amazing work in Southern California, but there are groups doing similar kinds of stuff all over the country. What they are doing is really watching for when ICE officers show up, and then they are both warning people as best they can through various kinds of networks, and also going and filming them and shouting at them and screaming at them and asking them how they can sleep at night and stuff like that. And so first of all, nobody should ever break the law, so that the Rule 11 motion against me must be denied. I also think it's true that ICE is engaged in blatantly lawless behavior, right? And the only opinion on the subject, just definitive, has said that it's blatantly lawless behavior. And so I do think that kind of complicates the normative question and also the legal question about what kinds of resistance are permissible. It's something that a lot of people on the ground are thinking about. But whatever you think about sort of all of that, I definitely think it's true that just very micro, local level organizing has proven extraordinarily effective. It hasn't fixed the problem, just like litigation, nothing else has either, fixed it, but it has done a lot to protect people in a very concrete way. Two other things I'll say sort of briefly. There are more aggressive state and local measures running against the federal government. There's some that have already been passed. California just passed an anti-masking statute, SB 627, which purports to directly regulate the federal government. It's obviously way out there on the spectrum of state federal supremacy and all that. But I also think, I think it was Kesu who had said yesterday, moments of crisis and disorder produce the possibility for new forms of, I'm butchering something that she said much more articulately than what I'm saying now, but you get the point, right? That these are moments when there could be significant change, and if there's enough political pressure and social pressure against what the government is doing, it might be true that these kinds of local and state measures will have an effect that they wouldn't have had under normal pre-existing doctrine. I also think there's room for really creative work to be done to figure out what will survive, what will be really hard to strike down, like the Texas heartbeat law, things like that. And that's something else that we're working at Center for Immigration Law and Policy also, and others throughout the sector are working on trying to figure out what those different kinds of options are, because there's, I think, a political appetite for them, because there is actually, in places like California, a lot of real horror and opposition to what it is that, what it is the government's doing. And I guess the last thing I would say is, teach this stuff, what so many of you all are doing already, and in the immigration context as well. And, it's amazing to see here. Jack Chin is here. My guru, Hiroshi Motomura, is not here right now, but he was here earlier. Kesu, I mean, so many others, I get in trouble, missing people, but so many people have done an amazing job of retelling the story of immigration law. So the immigration law that's being taught today is very different than the immigration law that was being taught when I was in law school 25 years ago. And that really matters. It embeds in it also the critique of liberalism that Professor Crenshaw and others are talking about it as a way of understanding the story. It's not just a set of rules that try to encourage economic prosperity and family unity and whatnot. It's like a project of racial engineering, and that has an effect. It allows for the possibility of new horizons. And if we don't do that, we end up in a world where they can weaponize like anti-Semitism and things like that against because there hasn't been a critique of that. And I think that is really important to teach people in a way. It's amazing that it's happening already in immigration law, and I hope it continues to spread so that the next generation of law students has an even more critical perspective than the ones that come before.
Okay, so finally, I want to turn to Saul and Sandy, who are, among the world's leading abolitionists and thinkers, abolitionist thinkers and practitioners. And in our prep call, I was really struck by the way that your work demands so much flexibility and what I would think of as just a project that requires imagination and moving beyond the current moment that we find ourselves in, because we can never get stuck in the crisis that we face today. That's not the realities of the people that you work with. It's not the realities on the ground, right? So tell us a little bit about, Sandy, about the work that you're doing defending people on the front line and as you put it, staying ready, for whatever is to come. And then Saul, you're really helping people to reimagine, even in small ways, what's possible in carceral spaces and educational institutions. So I want to invite you. Let's start with you, Saul, and then we can close it out with Sandy. Thank you.
Sure thing. Thank you. I want to start by saying that I graduated here in 1996 and had the privilege of being in the second ever CRT seminar that Kim taught. And for you all to know what that was like, the first day, what that meant is she told us, you are here to talk to each other about the articles that you've read to introduce the field. So go ahead. And of course, we were frightened to death to say anything, didn't say anything. And so she just got up and moved herself out of the circle and sat outside of it until we spoke. And I want to lead with that because I have dedicated the 30 years since then to do community organizing work here in Los Angeles for racial justice, and particularly to build racial solidarity across communities. And organizing ultimately is about protagonizing. It is about making a decision once you've been victimized by structures to move from being a victim of those structures to being an agent of change and acting on those structures. And I see the utility of the critical race frameworks in the work that I do as much as I see the utility of bringing the insights from organizing work into this project that we're all in. And it's why I've had one foot in the university working with student leaders who protagonize and who push because they see that the world that we have is not enough. And with community residents who are also living through the gaps that exist in systems and institutions, I do not do that to convince anyone that those systems and institutions can be made better by this amorphous thing called civic engagement, and particularly not colorblind civic engagement, which, believe it or not, is sort of what I walked into coming out of this law school in the largest county. And what I want to share with you is I titled this presentation, Organize from the Stigma, because my decision at that time was to organize people who had criminal record convictions, work with people who had been incarcerated, about the crazy idea that they should be treated as human beings like everybody else. And at the time, there was not a word for reentry. At the time, for those of you who've read The New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander describes pouring through the programs of all of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund conferences and not seeing any sessions on criminal justice in the 90s. The local chapter of the NAACP, when I started organizing with a woman named Susan Burton, who then became embedded in this program because we have students that learn how to do expungements for an organization that is led by a formerly incarcerated woman and that does that work to organize people, not to just make them feel like they're clean now, right? But to organize from the stigma. And at that time, the local NAACP chapter and the folks we talked to at MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund, basically looked at us and said, we have so few resources, there's so many people in our community that have not committed crimes, and in fact, the people that you are asking us to dedicate resources to committed crimes upon these innocent black and brown folks, it's just gonna be a tough sell. And to echo the Sanita's reminder and Cheryl's reminder that these are openings, right? That dark time felt like an opening because what it meant is that everybody else could get out of the way and we could actually support formerly incarcerated people to become the leaders of their own movement. That person who was there with me got out of prison after 6 terms at the age of 44 with $200 in her pocket. She is now thriving, turning 74, teaching other formerly incarcerated women how to build their own homes for formerly incarcerated women and creating something called the Formerly Incarcerated and Convicted People's Movement. And so I just want to say that that's a 30-year arc, and it's still within the context of all of the challenges that we have. But I do think we want to apply this lesson around historicizing on ourselves, and to do that in this moment. What does it mean to organize from the stigma? So today, I have the privilege of working with. I'm going to term formerly incarcerated people who are fighting against injustice as what they are, which is liberated leaders. And what I'm learning from liberated leaders who are also deported or deportable in this moment is the courage that they are having to demand, to organize themselves, to demand access to higher education. And the link between what we see, the significance that this panel has given to the attempted erasure of the real history and the yearning of folks to be able to have meaningful education inside and when they get out, and having now to witness and support them. In May, I was in Mexico City at a conference organized by liberated leaders there and here, who essentially are saying, if we're already taking classes inside and we're undocumented and deportable, then you in Mexico should remove the barriers that we have to enter higher education here. We did that. It was a 3-day conference, and then day 1, folks just testified what it looked like to be deported, to come here with all the stigmas that attach with being formerly incarcerated, and to try to access higher education in Mexico. On the second day, we were invited to a university in Mexico that was formerly a women's prison. And that happened because of an organizing campaign called Prepa sí, cárcel no, which means high school yes, jail no. And what I've learned since researching it since then is that this demand for a high school in the poorest part of Mexico City actually led to the creation of a high school curriculum in Mexico City, because if you weren't rich, middle class, you just didn't have public education after what is secondary school. And finally, what I want to say about what I learned there, if you guys ever go to Mexico City, It's La Universidad Autónoma de la Ciudad de Mexico, which is the antithesis of UNAM. UNAM faces the challenge that we have being in an elite institution here. It is an elite institution that precedes Harvard, and there are a lot of great people doing great work. UASM is the opposite. It's a decentralized university of the city government that is purposely putting campuses in very poor communities where people who are looking to be prestigious and all of that might not be. And that university kept the prison tower and the cells, and the women who were in those cells were student leaders in the 1968 movement against a repressive authoritarian regime. And so as we look at what we're facing, remember those women and remember the story that I'm telling you now about what was possible. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, as an activist, what I think is really important, one of the most important things, is making sure that people believe that they can have an impact on the world around them, and actually how few resources it really takes to have a huge impact. One of the weird particularities of, like I'm from Canada, as I said, so a lot of my work has been in Canada. One of the weird particularities of the Canadian political context is that when the federal government is liberal, the provinces tend to be more conservative. And so we were in the last little bit where you will have heard of, Justin Trudeau and all of that. A lot of the provinces were in a really conservative situation. So it was not necessarily the best organizing context for much of the work that we were doing. And in those moments, it's really important to stay ready at the local level, to stay ready and to do what you can at the local level and to make sure that you can have an impact as much as possible. And so during that time, some of the stuff that we had done was we set up what's called the Black Legal Action Center, which is a legal aid organization that focuses specifically on providing services to people who are Black, low income, or no income, and what we in Canada call test case litigation and what you call here impact litigation, specifically to try to have an impact on cases that were being considered at the time, and to see if we could get, given what was happening culturally at the time, to see if we could get some changes as to how the Supreme Court and criminal courts in Canada considered race, and we were able to have success there. We also were trying to get police removed from the largest public school board in Canada, which is the Toronto District School Board. And at the time, there was no interest in that. And now policing in schools in Canada really, this is not like a universal program. This is a program that exists, the SRO program. It was picked up from the United States, so it has the same name. It is where you will find the largest concentration of Black students. That's how it works. And so we were not able to get a win from the provincial government. But what did we do? We stayed ready at a local level and started focusing on parents, on teachers, and doing policy at the school board level and so on. And we had like a 10-year plan for this campaign. And within 3 years, we managed to win this campaign and get policing removed from the largest public district school board in North America. And then beyond that, still, like now, right? Right now, there continues to be a conservative government in the province of Ontario who decided that they wanted to overturn that win. It was one of the things that they announced is like we're gonna put police back in schools. Like nobody is begging for that. Like what in the world? And but because we were ready, we remained ready on the ground. We were able to respond to that. With strength, and they had to repeal that promise that they had made to put police back in schools. And so what does it mean to stay ready? One of the things that we did while I was in law school was there's this nonprofit that I founded back in Canada called the Wild Seed Center for Art and Activism. And the goal of that center is to, one, get a lot of the thoughts that we have around policy change talked about amongst artists and culture makers, so that we are creating things like art and documentaries, whatever it might be, to get a cultural shift happening at the same time that we are working on political activism through policy. And then additionally, we run yearly these training courses for local groups across the country and also in the United States. Like, some folks have joined us from the United States, and we do everything from skills building to learning about, like, making sure that we can deliver what we've learned here in critical race studies in a digestible way to someone who is fighting against the removal of the Haitian temporary protected status that's affecting large Haitian communities in the city of Montreal. Right, like, so we're doing that work. We're making sure that people are resourced as much as possible. And even while I was here, I have to thank Professors Harris, Zatz, and Carbato for helping me to put my thoughts together about abolition and policing into a book. And I wrote that book thinking people are going to need this resource when it is no longer en vogue to be talking about policing. People are going to need something to refer to remember what those arguments are for when we have to make them. And we have to make them now. Like, look at what's happening all around us. So when I think about, moving forward, what we need to do, I live in LA, I do a lot of work in Canada. I'm hoping that can be really helpful at a time like now, where people might be afraid to, if they need digital resources, do things in the United States and might need to make more connections in Canada. I think that that's really, really important. And so that's one of the things that I'm trying to figure out the best ways to do. I also think that I think people are, like, really nervous, but we need to start making some common sense resources available to people that will really help in this moment. So, like, for example, there's no one who's really tracking all of the people and organizations and institutions that have been impacted by First Amendment attacks. Like, there should be a website where you can just look up all of the people and organizations and institutions and so on that have been attacked. Like, that's a simple thing that we can create. And I'm working with some people to try to figure out some different coalition or building that we can do to get people to build that. And then I also think that one of the most important things that we can do at any time when people are scared and are engaging in prior compliance is to provide people as much resources as possible for if things go badly. So that means we need legal resources, as many legal resources as possible that people know they'll have access to, financial resources that people will know that they have access to, and just information. And so that will allow people to be able to make the decision to move, to do something, even if they are afraid, given the risk level that they can handle. So as much as possible, if we can do that, again, as people with power, as people with privilege, as much as we can, shepherd those resources together for people who need it on the ground, for the leadership on the ground who are especially being impacted by everything that's going on. That's what I think we're called to do in this moment.
And so with that, we're pretty much done. I just wanted to mention one thing, which is that I think for me, in starting this school year, I was just overwhelmed with the amount of bad news I was reading. And I just could not figure out how to center myself and how to focus on doing, what should I be doing? And I think one of the things that I realized is, and I'm sure I was talking to some brilliant friend who mentioned this to me actually, but now I'm just gonna say it's my own, is just to choose, just to do one thing, whatever that is, a bond hearing, neighborhood support, call a local elected official to say thank you for standing up against ICE. Whatever it is, do one thing, because as the zone is getting flooded, we need to flood it back. And every one thing we do is going to have a replicative effect and create a pushback. Even if it's not organized and coordinated, just choose one thing and do that one thing. And that's just my last word. I'm going to use as my moderator's prerogative. And then just to close us out, I want to have all of the founders of the CRS program who are here, please stand up.